Welcome in, everybody. My name is Dana Sharman, and today we're going to be doing an interview with Mick West. Mick West is a British-American science writer, a skeptical investigator, and a retired video game programmer who was the lead developer on Tony Hawk's Skater 1 through 5, fantastic video game series from my childhood, and the co-founder of Neversoft, the company that created it. He was elected a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry in 2020. He investigates and debunks conspiracy theories of all kinds, ranging from UFOs to chemtrails to QAnon. He's author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Fact, Logic, and Respect. And he's appeared on CBS, BBC, CNN, Radio New Zealand, and Scientific American as an expert conspiracy analyst and science communicator. Today, I interviewed Mick West about his life, his journey from a boy in England to an adult in LA, his experience with Neversoft, and his transition into becoming a conspiracy debunker on YouTube and as a writer. I chose to interview him due to his level-headed approach to conspiracy debunking. Often one of the main problems I see with conspiracy debunkers is they will use the same flawed logic to try to disprove somebody's conspiracy that the person themselves are using. Mick is not that kind of guy. He is scientifically backed, rigorous. He learns the math if he doesn't understand it. And I think what you're going to see today is a little bit of me learning something as well, because our conversation did definitely teach me quite a bit. I would highly recommend going and checking out his channel if you haven't already. He does fantastic videos on debunking many different kinds of conspiracies, including many of the ones that we talked about here today in much more detail than we go into. So without further ado, I hope you will enjoy this talk, and we're going to dive right into it now with Mick West. Yeah, I watched, way too much of your content. And you kind of answered a lot of the questions that I was initially going to approach you with here with the podcast. You know, I don't want to make you repeat all those, but at least when it comes to UFOs, I think it'd be a good opportunity to get another perspective on that too. So, yeah. So I'm going to start up the recording here. I like to just jump into these. I'm super casual about these. Yeah. I did want to talk to you though. Where were you born initially? Well, obviously not initially.
Initially, my first birth was in the UK. I was
perfect.
Born
And your second?
North of England.
Okay.
I guess my second could have been when I came to America, because I spent kind of half my life in the UK, and then the other half, a bit more than half now actually, in America. I think I came over when I was about 25 or so, a little bit, and now I'm in my 50s. So
I gotcha.
It's two different worlds, and the first one is kind of receding into memory, and here I am, still in the new one.
It kind of feels that way, you know. This is something I've always been super introspective and tried to monitor my progress through life, because I feel when I was younger, it seemed like a lot of older people didn't have answers to a lot of questions that I wanted answers to. And as I've aged, I've kind of tried to monitor like how that happens. And I've noticed that, you know, the older you get, the more everything just kind of fades into the past. You forget how important certain things were to you when you're younger. You know, they lose their meaning over the course of your life. So
I have a very, very vivid memory of when I was young, thinking like, grown-ups just don't get me. They just don't understand me. And when I'm a grown-up, I'm going to listen to kids, and I'm going to like talk to them and understand them. But, as you get older, you realize that the grown-ups kind of do understand kids. It's just that kids don't really understand the world. And when you grow up, you understand more about the world and how impossible it is to actually communicate to children. It's kind of a good perspective, I think, for, if you're doing like stuff like I'm doing, like YouTube videos, explaining things to people. Not everyone has the same level of understanding as you do. And you've got to try to figure out what people actually understand before you can actually try to explain it to them in terms they can actually comprehend. So, a little life lesson learned as a kid. Well, later.
Yeah, I did hear you mention in one of your videos that you had a high IQ, and it was difficult for you growing up with that.
It's
So
not like I boast about my high IQ. I don't want to like give people that idea.
Obviously, yeah, but it's interesting to me. Because I've known several high IQ people, and some of them have struggled in life. Many of them have become super, like, hyper focused is what I tend to associate it with most. People who are intelligent tend to become very hyper focused on certain things in life. Did you notice that yourself?
Well, to a degree, I mean, it's handy being able to figure things out, but I'm not smart in all regards. I mean, you should talk to my wife; she thinks I'm pretty stupid in some regards. But you get good at certain things, but it's not really about IQ when you're trying to communicate with people. It's more about what they know and what they understand, and having a high IQ can be obviously helpful with figuring stuff out, but you can go down the wrong path very easily, even if you have a super high IQ. There are lots of people with high IQs who believe in all kinds of strange conspiracy theories.
Do you have any names that you could mention there?
Well, there's a professor of physics called J. Marvin Herndon, and he believes in chemtrails, essentially. He believes that the chemtrail conspiracy theory is true and the government is spraying stuff from planes, and yet he has a PhD in physics, and he has published papers in physics, and he also believes a bunch of other strange theories. You get scientists who, I think, to a certain degree, because they have a high IQ, it can actually make them a little bit more susceptible to falling into certain rabbit holes, because they know that they are very smart. And this is something I had a problem with when I was very young. I thought I was the smartest guy in the world, and I'll just go out and solve all the world's problems, and didn't really work out like that. But if you think you're really smart, then when you think you figure something out, you think you must be right. And it's very difficult for other people to dissuade you, because you're so smart. Why should I listen to you? So you get professors who believe in conspiracy theories, and not just a few of them. There's lots of people who take different positions on very polarizing positions where only one side can be correct, like the anthropic global warming, climate change. To what degree is man's carbon dioxide emissions responsible for it? You get some people who say absolutely nothing, zero, none at all, and some people who, the majority of them, who say that man is responsible for it. So, but because this group of people, they're professors or whatever, they think, I'm a professor, I must be right. So it's a difficult thing to deal with, and it's a difficult thing to talk to people who know how smart they are, and hence assume that you must be wrong.
I think that taps on one of the issues that I've had with conspiracy debunking in general when it comes to UFOs or really anything, is that scientific rigor can often lead people to miss the obvious. And a perfect example of that is one I heard in the last couple months. It was a rogue wave story, I think from the 1920s or 1910s. Perhaps you've heard of it. Anyway, scientists originally believed, I guess in the 1850s, 1900s, early 1900s, that waves could only reach a certain height in oscillation. There was only a certain height waves could get to. But there have been stories from sailors for hundreds and hundreds of years of giant waves overtaking ships. And it wasn't until it was actually recorded, I think, on an offshore oil rig, the actual wave height was measured, that scientists even began to consider that waves could be that high and began to research it. And that's one of the things that I feel can lead to conspiracy belief, because scientists become so locked in their beliefs about a certain set. Like, for example, the speed of sound. That was another one that used to be thought to be impossible to pass. I'm wondering, it leaves me open to wonder if the speed of light may someday be something like that we surpass or find a way around.
Based on what we know now, this is what people think is the answer. But it could well be that there's something that we're missing. It becomes kind of, I think, increasingly less likely as we get better and better at science. A lot of the examples you talk about are kind of from a period in time where science was still evolving, and we didn't really have the same degree of rigor and the same international peer review and things like that. There are things like from the history of science. There's lots of examples of this type of thing. Like no one believed that stomach ulcers were caused by a bacteria until some guy drank a big jug of this bacteria and it caused stomach ulcers. People didn't believe that rocks could fall out of the sky, like meteorites. They thought that was just like, an urban legend or something, until it was, eventually proven. I don't think they even actually really observed it, but it's something that doesn't happen very often, and it's hard to observe. So these things, I think, were perhaps a bit easier, like say 100 years ago. But even now, we still find new things in science. New things are being observed. Atmospheric phenomena. There's new types of atmospheric phenomena that were only really recorded on video in the last 20 years, which are really fascinating. So science does improve, and it does. Sometimes we do have to throw out some old paradigms. But when we're getting down to things like the subatomic level and the speed of light and things like that, we're getting very good at it, and it's going to require something quite dramatic to actually move beyond that.
That's fair. That is fair. I did want to ask you too. Do you have a degree? Did you go to college? Are you a physicist or anything like that? Okay. I
have a degree in computer science.
In computer science,
which,
okay.
I don't really consider it to be. It was programming, but back then, in the 80s, I was programming on my little home computer, like a ZX81 and a ZX Spectrum. I think I had a Atari ST when I was in college. That was my big computer. And I was doing lots of programming on my own time, and I kind of just viewed college as just something I had to get through. So I got the degree. So I wouldn't say I was really taught that much at college. Although there's a bunch of stuff that ended up being useful, like some of the 3D graphics stuff. Obviously, it's quite useful for video games, 3D graphics. But it was just fairly simple mathematics, most of it. But I have a degree in computer science, but I don't have a degree in a lot of the stuff that I talk about, like physics or aerodynamics or flight mechanics and things like that. So people will jump on there and they'll say like, oh, well, why should I listen to you instead of this guy who has a degree in physics? Why should you listen to me about chemtrails when there's this guy here who's a PhD in physics and he says chemtrails are real?
Yeah, that was a difficult sell for me on one of your videos. You'd mentioned, I think it was one of the engineers for the FLIR system that had done another podcast and had like debunked you or something like that. And that one right there. See, obviously I don't have all the details on hand for that, but that video did exist out there. And watching that one, it did seem like you did a great job of picking out the parts where he was wrong and at least admitting to parts where at least there was some contention. And that's why I had a lot of respect for you, because there's a lot of skeptics I've seen on the internet where they've, like I said, they're just so diehard set on not listening. They don't really address the questions that are brought up to them. They sidestep around them in the same way that a lot of conspiracy theorists do. And I hate to see that. So
it's difficult because I don't have the degrees or expertise that some people have, but then I've also been looking at the problem that we're talking about often for quite a lot longer, and then they bring someone in who's an expert, and they are an expert in various regards, and then they ask them a question about something that I've perhaps been studying for a year or two. And this person is just asked, kind of a leading question about it and without any real context. And then they give an answer which is kind of correct based on the context of the question. Like what I think you're referring to is to do with the rotation of the gimbal. Excuse me. The gimbal UFO, they brought in an engineer who he worked at Boeing, I think, and he did test equipment for the FLIR system, but he was familiar with it. And he was asked, could this this thing within the FLIR system, the derotation mechanism, rotates a glare independently of the background. To which the answer is no, because it's not even really that relevant to the whole argument. And the guy answered no, and people took that as being, oh, Mick West is wrong. But he was answering the wrong question, and he didn't really understand the context of it. So even though he's an expert brought on and he's answering questions correctly, he didn't actually amount to anything because he wasn't really asked the right questions.
I see that a lot, and I think that was probably the most important skill I learned personally in college. Was I took this class on critical thinking and logic. It was a philosophy class, and when I first signed up for it, I thought it was going to be just a, to be or not to be kind of class. But really what it was a mathematical breakdown of language and communication so that you can determine whether what somebody's saying is an actual valid statement or not. And just that one class, I think it was like a 201 level class. It changed my life. Like really, it changed the way I approached pretty much everything. And I wish more people got an opportunity to learn that sort of thing. Was that something you were sort of born with, or did you have a moment in your life where you realized that you had critical thinking skills that perhaps others didn't?
Well, not really. No, I don't know. When I was growing up, I was better at mathematics than I was at English. But in a way, it seemed to me because English seemed kind of boring. So we did maths and English it was like English comprehension was most of what they studied. So you would read a passage and then they would ask you a question about the passage and then you'd have to write down what the answer was. And I always thought that was just like really, really stupid. Because they tell you what the answer is right there in the passage, and then you've got to just repeat it. So obviously I had English comprehension back then, but I think then I kind of focused a bit too much on the mathematics part of it. And then later in life I did a lot of reading, and I think it just all kind of bubbled together, and then I just kind of got into doing this type of thing. But yeah. A lot of my skill set actually comes from computer programming, and it's not really about English understanding and logic and things like that, which is logic, but not like logic.
I would definitely call coding logic.
Argumentative, yeah, but it's much more formal logic. So it's the actually if this then that, and these combinations of Boolean logic states and things like that, and the mathematics behind it and the geometry and whatnot. But that's the practice of looking at things in these very straightforward terms. What does this actually mean? It's quite helpful when you're trying to understand an argument that someone's making, or some kind of bit of science or something, because you get to look very precisely at what is being said. Where a lot of people they just kind of, it's almost like they're building something with words. And they don't really understand how the words interact with each other and what the words really mean, and that they might mean different things for different people. And then they just kind of flow along, and if this, then this, well, this happens, and because of this, and then this, and they come to some kind of conclusion. But the actual what they're saying doesn't really justify it. And you see this like a lot in the conspiracy theories, especially the more extreme ones, like the flat Earth conspiracy theory.
QAnon.
And you read some of that, and those you read some of those, and the leaps of logic are just it's mind blowing. How do you get from this to this, and you feel like you must have missed something, but no, you haven't. It's really they've not really missed something, but they're just kind of gone from here, and they go over to here. So yeah, it's good to be able to break things down, but you also need to then communicate that to people. You need to be able to explain it to other people, and it's all very well you understanding the logic and everything, but you've got to be able to communicate it.
So you probably find yourself more in a teacher mindset a lot of the time.
Yeah. You've got to. I always say debunking is two parts. There's the investigation and there's the communication. As investigation is you're trying to figure out, is this true? Is this claim true? And if it's not, or even if it is, then you've got to figure out how do you explain that to people. So you could do the math on something, and you end up with like a bunch of equations or something, and You show these people and they just goes over their head because most people don't understand equations.
Triangles are not UFOs, okay? Come on, Mick.
Yeah, most triangles are not UFO shaped. Most UFOs are not triangle shaped. But yeah, like this is extraordinarily simple mathematics I have on this page here. Just something I was doing earlier today. I'm just like the lens equation, and it's just
what are you working on there?
4 lines. It's to do with focus. So I thought I would try deriving all of the equations of optics from first principles to make sure I understood them. So I was deriving the lens equation, which is the relationship between the focal length, the distance to the object, and the distance to the focal plane, I guess. Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, it's a very simple equation, but you can be presented with an equation, but if you don't understand it yourself, then it's difficult to explain it to other people. So, I find the equation on Wikipedia or wherever, but I don't know how they got this equation. So I looked into, how it is. It's just very, very simple. And then I start, make sure I understand how the equation arose, so that if I'm trying to explain something, I wouldn't explain that, but I've got this base of understanding. It's like when you're writing a book, you want to have lots of background on the characters in the book, so you know how they're going to react, so it's all consistent and it all makes sense, even if you don't explain that background. So this doing equations from first principles is kind of my way of doing background for the explanations that I give to people later.
You can definitely tell with a lot of different people on the internet, they don't do that level of research. They don't do the math themselves. They don't go look up the equations, and it definitely shows. I personally am terrible at math. When it comes to stuff like that, like when somebody shows me an equation like that, I don't trust myself enough to look at it and say, oh no, he's correct, or no, he's not. But typically what I'll find myself doing more often is going and finding somebody who does and saying, hey, what's this? And have them say whether it's true or not. Do you feel that's a valid way of going about things, or is that riskier?
It is. I mean, if the argument is based on mathematics, then you've kind of either got 2 options. You can either pick who you're going to believe, which is kind of a ridiculous way of going about things. You're just picking someone that you prefer. So if I give an argument and I say, this object is halfway between the ocean and the camera, and someone else says, no, I've done the math and it's at sea level. Do you simply pick which answer you find the most attractive, or which person you believe more? Or do you try to do the math yourself? Now, if you can't do the math, then the next best thing is actually to get someone else who can do the math and get them to look at it, or just find different people who have done the same thing. You're looking at like topics like this UFO thing I discussed. Like lots of different people have done the same mathematics and they've all come to the same answer, and so you kind of get a weight of opinions there. But even then, that doesn't always work. With climate change, 98% of climate scientists, maybe even 100% of climate scientists, are more or less on the same wavelength. But people will say, "Oh, well, I prefer to believe this very small group of scientists, this 1% of scientists, because it seems to align better with my personal philosophy." So it's you can't always go by the weight. That itself isn't compelling. You have to find a more personal approach of getting the science across. You have to find someone that this person actually respects to explain the science to them. So it's very difficult, and it often can't be done in a way where they will understand the mathematics, and then you've got to try to figure out some other way of demonstrating it. And I like to do practical demonstrations wherever possible, like get the camera up and like move things around in space and show what's actually going on, which is kind of fun. But yeah, it's a challenge when the majority of people in the world do not understand algebra, and your explanation kind of relies upon algebra. It's very difficult to explain it to people.
And to be fair, algebra is pretty basic math. It's just not something that ever comes up in life for me. I think the first time I ever needed algebra was when I was taking a programming boot camp a couple years ago. And I wanted to make a I think it was a 3D rendered image, like a spinning sphere or something like that. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever needed math for anything,
Right.
basically.
Well, that's pretty advanced. I mean, people, like when you're doing woodworking, if you're building like carpentry, you're actually doing simple algebra.
Well,
like you're doing things like doing some drawers, and you have to have like it's like 3 foot high, and the drawers are like 6 inches long, and you've got so many drawers. So how big are the spaces between the drawers? You're essentially doing algebra for something like that. But people don't think of that. They actually work it out without using the little letters and symbols and things. But you're essentially doing algebra, and obviously there's lots of very simple problems. Like if you're calculating change, you're essentially, you're
okay, fair.
Or you're splitting a restaurant tab between a variety of people. It's kind of like you're using algebra without really realizing it. And where algebra actually comes in useful when things get a little bit more complicated, and then you get to and you start using these letters and symbols. It actually makes it a bit easier than just working with the raw numbers. But perhaps like if I focus more on just using the raw numbers, people would actually understand it a bit better.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad you were able to explain that here, because I hope anyway that can help bridge the gap for people who may not feel like they understand what you mean when you talk about those mathematical equations, especially when it comes to measuring the distance of the object and distance of it from the surface and things like that. Breaking it down in terms like that, perhaps people might be a little more receptive to it now. I can always hope.
Yeah, well, I do tell people that it's 10th grade math. I have a little diagram. I can't remember where I put it. Oh, it's on my whiteboard. Let me just grab it.
I think if I was a farmer from Iowa and you told me that I didn't know 10th grade math, I'd fight you.
Well, farmers from Iowa probably do know 10th grade math, because they will do things like dividing up their fields and figuring out how much fuel to use for a certain amount of run, and they will probably have equations that are given to them by like the fertilizer manufacturers, and they will say like take the whatever the temperature is and your soil type and plug it into this equation, and this gives you the flow rate of fertilizer that you need. So simple equations like that. Like this isn't even an equation here. Well, actually, this is an equation, but there's only two numbers on this, like 26 degrees and 4.4 miles, and then you just take 4.4 and multiply it by. Now this is where it gets complicated. The sine of 25 degrees.
Words.
But it's like, but it's just one number multiplied by something of another number. And so if you could get that much across to people, then they might.
Look, it's very clear.
Understand it.
It's right there. So I kind of jumped the gun.
It's hard to understand
on a lot of this conversation here, because I did want to ask you. I heard you mention you were into photography as well.
Yeah, I am very much so.
What kind of cameras do you have? What's your favorite camera, at least?
Well, let's see. What's my favorite camera at the moment is my iPhone 13 Pro.
So many lenses.
Which, yes, I know. It's obviously it's not the best camera I have, but in some ways it actually is, because it's the one that's in my pocket all the time, and it's super good at taking low light photography, and it's very good at taking people's faces. But my big cameras are over here on the shelf. Let me grab them real quick.
All right. Oh wow!
So this is an older camera. It's a Canon 7D, but it still works just fine.
What lens is that? Is that like a 200 to 600 or?
It's a 50 to 500.
50 to 500. Which is wow.
It's a very nice range. Very nice range.
Full frame.
50, gives
camera?
it's a Sigma lens on a Canon 7D.
Oh, is that a full frame sensor on the 7D?
No. Yeah. 7D is a crop sensor. Okay. Then I have a Nikon P900. This is the camera that flat earthers love. It's
why is that?
Not a particularly good camera in most ways, but it does have essentially a 2000 millimeter zoom lens, which is obviously very impressive in terms of switch it off there. I think it said battery's dead, and I converted it to infrared. So it's got an infrared filter, which is why it looks completely black.
Infrared photography, or is that for a specific purpose that you did that for?
Oh well, infrared was very useful for flat Earth debunking because it cuts through a lot of the haze when you're taking long distance photography of things like distant mountains. It makes it a lot clearer to see certain things. And also, there's a few things that crop up from time to time with infrared, like ghost videos and things like that of orbs flying around, and it was useful for explaining that. I've got like a bunch of other cameras as well, none of which are immediately within reach. I mean, I've got my old iPhones that I have in my drawer.
Oh, you keep them?
Keep it around. Yeah, this is an iPhone 1. Just in case I need to go back and look at some.
That's got to be worth something now.
It's surprisingly not.
Really?
Well, I mean, it is actually. If it's in mint condition, if you got one in mint condition in the box, it's worth over $1,000.
Wow.
But this, I think, is like $50 or something on eBay. I just looked it up yesterday, actually.
I'm surprised your screen isn't broken. I think every single iPhone I owned, the screen ended up broken. Have you always been an iPhone guy, never Android?
Yeah. Well, since the iPhone 1, yeah. So yeah, it's let's see, what other cameras do I have? I've just got some like little old cameras here. There's another one I converted to infrared, like a compact camera. But yeah, I've got lots of cameras and lots of lenses. They're all up on the shelf over there.
Do you do like landscape photography or like what's your favorite type?
Not really. Vacation photography.
Vacation, just taking pictures in general.
Yeah. Okay. No, just like and just whatever I'm doing, taking photographs of it, and yeah. But a lot of it now, I do the debunking photography, so it's trying to replicate something like a UFO video or something, and so I'll set up all the different cameras and the different fields of view and everything, and try to replicate some effect, which is fun. But yeah, I think for everyday photography now, most of the time I'm just going to use the iPhone, which I've been doing for quite a long time. I don't actually get my big camera out very often, but when I do,
kind of a pain to drag around.
Good. Oh, it is. It weighs 7 pounds.
Oh my god! Yeah, that lens
doesn't sound like that much, but it's it's actually.
No, it adds up.
Starts to wear on you after a while.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I was asking today too, because I got into photography myself last year, and I just picked up a 16-55 G lens for this Sony A6400, and I'm just loving the pictures.
That's my other camera. I forgot to mention. It's let's see. I don't actually have.
Got a bucket.
This is a mirror, but I'm showing you my.
I see.
My A6400.
We got the same setup.
Which is.
Yeah, I just upgraded off that kit lens. I couldn't do it anymore, especially in landscape photography. The corners are so soft on that kit lens. For vlogging and stuff, nobody's gonna know. But when I started making
18-50 lens,
the 18-50. Yeah.
Or is it? No, it's the 16-50.
I think it's 16-50. The kit lens,
it's
16, a little short pancake lens.
Yeah, it works for me.
It's good. It's a good lens, especially a starter lens. One of the other questions I want to ask you. So, I kind of skipped over some of your education. It sounds like did you go straight to college after high school?
Yeah. That's kind of the way it was back in the UK when I was growing up. Like you did your O levels and your A levels, and then you went to university. And so I grew up in Yorkshire, and then I went to Manchester University, just over the hill on the other side of the UK. And yeah,
are you a football fan?
3-year degree. Not so much, but I've never really been much of a sports fan when I was growing up. But I guess Man City would be my team if I was in the UK.
Did you skate? Did you skateboard?
I did not skateboard. I was actually quite kind of embarrassed to say I was a rollerblader, which is much less cool than a skateboard.
Explains a lot. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, yeah, I do have a skateboard, but this one here I've never ridden. This is the one that Tony Hawk gave us all when we did the first Tony Hawk game. But yeah, went straight to university and did a 3-year degree in computer science. Spent most of my time messing around in my room on my computer, and then left and got a job in the video game industry.
Were your parents supportive of your choices going that route into video games and that sort of stuff? Especially, what was this, the 80s?
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, they didn't really, computers were very new back then. So I got a ZX81 first in 1981, which is this little computer. It had 1K of memory. It came with 1K of memory. And then I got ZX Spectrum. But my first computer, I asked my mother if I get half the money for this, it cost £70, 70 UK pounds, which is about $90, $100, something like that. I said, if I get half the money for it, will you give me the other half? And she says, oh, yeah, sure. And she didn't really believe I was going to do it. And like, I got a paper round and I saved up all my money and I eventually managed to get like, £35. And I said, all right, Mum, give me the other £35. And she was like, what? Oh, yeah, I guess I did say that.
Hey, and she
so
stuck
I
to
got
her
the
word?
computer. Yeah. So I got the
Perfect.
computer, and then later on I bought like a more powerful computer with some money I got, and she was like, "Oh, why are you spending all that money on that computer?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going to learn stuff, and I'll get a job." And she said, "No, you should be like reading books on engineering or something." But I persisted, and it all worked out.
Yeah.
After I finished my course, like what happens to most people after they finish their university course, a lot of them just go back home and live with their parents. And instead, I had actually I just won a competition at the end of my last year of university. It's this competition called IT 2010, where you had to predict what the future would be like in the year 2010. And the prize was £2,010, which was a lot of money back then. And I won the first prize, and that allowed me to basically get an apartment in Manchester after I left university. Spent more time messing around with my computer, like writing little video games. Then eventually, I applied for a job at a video game company and got the job. And so I never had to return home, which was great.
So that was the next place I wanted to go with this too. You mentioned that you went into the video game industry. So founding Neversoft wasn't your first step into the industry?
No. My first job was at a company called Binary Design, which is a British company in Manchester. Not a very great company, and they actually went bankrupt shortly after I joined them. Not because of me. I was one of the few people they kept on after they did their big reorganization. And then I went to another company for a year, and then I ended up at a company called Ocean Software, which is one of the more well-known British developers at the time. And then what happened was a lot of people were moving to America, and I thought this was like a great idea. And they were earning so much money, it seemed like. And so basically some people had already moved to America, and they said that we're looking for programmers. Mick, you want to come over? Here's a job. And so I took the job over there. So got to America, worked at this company there for a year. It's called Malibu Interactive, a division of Malibu Comics. And worked there for a year, and then other people started leaving and forming their own companies, and that was the thing everybody was doing. And so some people were like, "Hey, Mick, we're starting our own company. You want to do it?" And that was Joel Jewett, one of the other founders of Neversoft, and said, "Yeah, let's bring along Chris." And Chris, the third member, and so we started Neversoft. And
just on a whim like that? Did you guys have a plan for what?
Well,
you were going to
no, we had a plan. Yeah, basically. We all worked at this Malibu company, and you get a few contacts in the industry, and people in the industry are looking for teams to do games. And they said, like, if you've got a team, then there's a game. And so Joel had done some negotiations, and basically we had our first game lined up as we were leaving. And
which game was that?
And then just it was called Skeleton Warriors. It was the company was called Playmates Interactive. It was actually a Saturday morning breakfast cartoon. It was kind of like like not He-Man, the Masters of the Universe type thing, with skeletons and princes and things. Gotcha. And there was a toy line and everything. And so we just did the game of the show, and we did just a nice little running and slashing game. 16-bit game, and then we would just move on to doing other games after that.
So how many games did you end up
companies
developing in total?
I think I worked on about 10 games. I mean, you'd have to look at my list of games on Moby Games. Like I did a bunch of games in the UK, like maybe 5 games in the UK, and then I think at Neversoft we did 10 total. I think whilst I was there, um, and I did the last 5 of them were all Tony Hawk games. But the first ones were the Skeleton Warriors. There was MDK. There was Apocalypse. And then there was 2 other games that didn't get published, which were Ghost Rider and Big Guns. And Big Guns was this kind of mech shooter game, which was a lot of fun, but the project kind of went in different directions and eventually got cancelled because it went in the wrong direction. Would have been a lot more fun if we just went with the first thing that we started with, which was just a running around shooting things thing. But yeah, so we worked on about 10 different games, 8 of which got published. And the last 5 were great.
They definitely were. So with those unpublished games, how does that process go? How does it end up in a position where you have to make a decision to cancel all the years of work? Or
we don't make that decision. Like as a developer, we're working for a publisher, and we didn't have the money to develop our own games on spec.
Okay.
So we had to get month-to-month income because we're burning through essentially like $1 million a year on even fairly early on, just in having a few people in the office, and we didn't have any money. Joel basically mortgaged his house to get a $50,000 line of credit to bootstrap the company, and Chris and I didn't have any money at all, because we just moved over from England and we just had a little bit of savings, but that's it. So we bootstrapped the company by getting contracts where people will pay us on a monthly basis. So it's at their discretion whether they continue the game or not. So with like say Ghost Rider, I think that was just kind of a result of kind of Crystal Dynamics, I think was the company there. They basically just were doing a big reorganization. And then the Big Guns thing was with Sony, and Sony decided they didn't like the game and they decided to move on, which was I'm not entirely sure why, but I think it was just a kind of a conflict of personnel and stuff. And
was that
they just
hard
call
on
you
you?
one day. Yeah, they call you one day and they say, we're canceling the project. And that's it. And we'll pay you for this month. And then, see you. So it was difficult, but it's like a fresh start. You've been laboring. Sometimes these games, if they're being cancelled, often they're not that good because there are difficulties with them. So it's kind of good in a way. You get to have a fresh start, but then of course you start to run out of money, and you've got to get a game as quickly as possible, and that can be difficult. But we managed to do it.
Was there a point where you thought it might not work out, the company might not make it?
Sure, yeah. Like after Apocalypse, which is what Big Guns? No, Apocalypse. No, it was after Big Guns Big Guns was renamed Exodus and then cancelled. And when that happened, that was our big earner at the time. We were doing another game at the time, which was a conversion of MDK, which is a PC game. We were converting to the PlayStation. And we suddenly had no income stream. And we had, I think, like 10 or 11 people on staff, and we had to pay salaries. And we only had a certain amount of money. And so we could only last, like a month or two. And so we started prototyping all kinds of different games and just trying to get something to show to people. We did a Tiger Woods golf prototype in 3 days or something, and tried to sell that to someone. We did a bass fishing prototype. We did a kind of an F-Zero style stunt, futuristic stunt racing game, and we did like a rally car going through British villages. We did all these in a matter of days or weeks, and then tried to sell them to people. But eventually what it came down to was us taking the old Big Guns demo, which was really nice. It was these mechs wandering around, flying and jumping and stuff and shooting things and all these cool aliens and explosions. and showing that to people. And we showed it to Activision, and they thought that maybe we could help them with this game that they were left stuck with because their developer had kind of messed it up, which is called Apocalypse, which was a game starring Bruce Willis. And so we kind of signed on to do that and just put everything into it. And it turned out, pretty well. Saved their bacon because they had a lot of money invested in it, and it needed to be out by Christmas. You had Bruce Willis's name attached to it. And
were they struggling too at the time?
Not especially, but I think they were doing a lot better after Tony Hawk took off. I'm not sure exactly what their situation was, but they seemed like they were doing okay.
So where did Tony Hawk? Where did that game idea come from? That seems like a very novel idea for the time, a skateboarding game.
It kind of came from Activision. Someone in Activision, marketing or creative or somewhere, I kind of was just trying to figure out what segments of what youth markets didn't have games. And there wasn't a very good skateboarding game out there. And so the idea was that they would just do a very good skateboarding game, and they would attach a famous person to it. They didn't know who yet. And they would sell a lot of copies of it. They didn't, obviously realize just how successful it would be, but that was the basic idea. So they came to us and said, we'll give you 3 months, give us a demo of a skateboarding game, which is fun to play. And so that's what we did.
How did you know? Because I heard this story with the Rocket League development team, Psionics, and that's the main game I played, which if you didn't know, that's primarily what I do is I stream on Twitch and I play a lot of video games. Yeah. So I know my audience, especially the older generation, they really enjoy hearing about this sort of stuff, especially because I'm sure some of them have played these games. Yeah, with Tony Hawk, that game was a staple of my childhood. That was such a fun game. I grew up all day today. I've had that song Superman playing in my head. Like it's that iconic to me. So it was interesting to me that you didn't skate, but did you think it was going to be a major hit, the game?
Yeah, I did. Not immediately, but I recognized that we had something that was a lot of fun to play, and that we had a lot of content in it, like lots of different levels and things you could do in it. And I really enjoyed playing it. So I wasn't a skater, but I was a game player. And I wasn't trying to do a skateboarding simulator. Skateboarding's very difficult when you start into it. You fall over a lot and you get injured. And even when you're fairly good at it, it's kind of tedious. You've got to walk back to the start of the run and everything. So I designed it all to be the most fun possible game that I could play, doing that type of thing. Sliding along and jumping and doing turns and grinding and doing tricks. So if it felt good to me, I figured it would feel good to other people. And then we started getting focus testers in, and they started really enjoying playing it. And other people within the company enjoyed playing it. And then we did a demo disc, which went out like hundreds of thousands of copies of this demo disc were distributed. And people really enjoyed playing this little demo because it's a fun little thing. Like I kind of subscribe to kind of like the toy theory of games, that you should be able to just jump around or do whatever you're doing in the game just for fun. It's like if you've got a first person shooter, it should be fun just to go into sniper mode and snipe at trees or something like that. It should feel good. It should feel satisfying. It should be fun just to run and jump on things. If that doesn't feel like fun, then you've got a problem. So all these things themselves should feel like you're actually doing something that is fun. And so that's the philosophy I tried to put into Tony Hawk. And like grinding on rails, it should feel like chunk when you get on there. When you jump off the top of a lip, you should be able to. You should be able to do it without missing. If it feels like you should have made it, then you do make it, even if you're technically a little bit too late. When you come back down, you should land in the half pipe. You shouldn't have to like wiggle left and right just to aim to get in the half pipe. You should naturally come back down because that's what you want to do. You want to jump up, you want to come back down. the fun isn't in like trying to thread the needle every time. That's a difficult real world thing that you're doing.
Precision platformers are notorious for that too. I don't know if you're familiar with that genre, but that's the idea behind those. And Tony Hawk, I agree. You're right. Like it needs to be easily approachable, and it's it kind of hit the mark, a little bit. I think a few people around the world may have heard of that game series by this point. It
was fun. It was fun making it and playing it, and fun listening to people enjoy it as well. And years later, some guy comes to fix my AC, and he was like, "You did Tony Hawk? Wow, I play that all the time."
Do you ever get tired of hearing about it? I think about that sometimes.
It's always fun.
Okay.
I'll be an old man, and slightly less old men will be coming in and say, "You did Tony Hawk? Yeah, it's amazing. I played that when I was young."
Oh, that's the dream, though. So after, that's another question I wanted to ask you. The Easter eggs in Tony Hawk, was that a new idea? Because I don't know that I had played a game prior to that had Easter eggs and hidden things and areas to find.
Well, we gave the designers a lot of leeway in terms of what they put in the game. So they were put in little hidden areas and things. And we did all the usual cheat codes and stuff like that. And some of that was just part of the game itself. And some of it was unintentional, of course. You get little glitches that weren't actually intended to be there. You could get through walls and go to different areas and things if you hit things in a certain way. But yeah, it's just lots of content in a game is a good thing. Because you want to have things that are rich to play in different directions. Like you want it so that the pure simplicity of the gameplay is good, but you also want a detailed world to explore and lots of different goals to achieve within that world. You play games like Zelda and there's or Mario, and there's lots of different goals within the game. It's not just like you're getting from A to B and that's it. So having lots of different things is good, and like finding all the different Easter eggs, even if it's not a formal goal, is just one more layer of stuff. And the designers like to have fun. They like to put a little bit of themselves into the levels and have something that they could point to and say, I added that goat or whatever it was.
Did you have your own mark in the game?
And well, I suppose the gameplay itself is my mark. It's like the actual control, like when you jump and when you grind a rail. That's stuff that I put in the way it feels and the way you snap to a thing. It's kind of a lot of that was my decision as to how that actually worked, especially in the earlier games. Based on feedback from testers as well, but yeah, I feel like my mark on the game is just how it feels and the fact that it feels good.
So after the first game blew up, how did the dynamic change at the office? I got to imagine there was an influx of funding. Did the team grow? Did more staff come on? How did it differ from the first
interesting.
production?
After the first game, we didn't expect it to be such a big thing. I mean, we knew it was going to be popular, but we didn't expect it to be this like multi-million-dollar income stream for the company. So we actually planned on growing the company and doing two different games. So after Tony Hawk 1, we did Tony Hawk 2 and Spider-Man. So we split into two teams, with half the company working on the second Tony Hawk and the other half working on Spider-Man, which was fine. It worked out well. The Spider-Man game was really good, and Tony Hawk 2 was really good. But after that, it was just our sole focus was on the Tony Hawk games for a number of years after that. So yeah, it was like this slow realization of what a big thing that we had. Tony Hawk 2 is one of the highest rated games of all time. And Tony Hawk 1 was already very successful. So once we got to the end of that year, I think it really kind of sunk in as to, we got something huge and we have to be careful and we have to be, moving forward with a clear vision as to what we're doing. But then we had to do Tony Hawk 3 on the PlayStation 2. So it was a whole different kettle of fish. Like we just perfected our game on Tony Hawk 2, which was on the first PlayStation, and now we're coming over to Tony Hawk 3 on the next PlayStation, and that was a bit difficult. And we ended up using the renderware engine, third-party engine, instead of our own engine, which was, I guess in hindsight, maybe it helped us get the game out on time, but it was also a lot of problems. And if you look at the games after that, you'll notice that Tony Hawk 3 is a very bare-looking game. There's not very much in it in terms of things moving around in the levels and complexity within the levels. It's kind of a minimalist game in a way. But it's also a lot of fun because of that, because the lines are super clean. But that was a technical limitation because of the engine that we were using didn't let us put too many different NPCs in or too many different textures in the level. Like for some reason, all the textures had to be unique, which means they all used up memory. And after that, we did our own engine and got more stuff in, and then the game's kind of like, for me, they kind of reached a peak with Tony Hawk Underground, which was the last game I worked on. So I would say that, but
yeah, I was going to say that's the last one I remember. So
yeah.
So what?
Yeah, there was the.
Oh, sorry. Cheat codes. You'd mentioned this earlier, and I forgot to ask you. Why did developers put cheat codes in games? What was the purpose of that?
Well, in part, it was a testing thing. So when you do a final version of the game, that's like almost final, you want to be able to go in and jump to a different level and test out a certain thing, and you don't want to have to boot up the game and play through all the way through. And you want to be able to sometimes jump into a kind of a debug mode where you could fly around the level. And so you always had to have some cheat codes in, but cheat codes were just a natural part of games back then. Like most games that I worked on from the very earliest days had cheat codes of one sort or another. And all the way back to the ZX Spectrum in the 80s, you would have some kind of cheat code. There's a famous, I can't remember, it's a Nintendo cheat code, I think, like from Metroid, I think, perhaps, like, which is up, down, left, right, fire, which is, one of the classic cheat codes. But yeah, games have cheat codes, and it became an expected thing to do, and so you may as well have fun with it. Yeah. And it leads into the philosophy of games as toy. If you can make the game be more fun with a little bit more, not more fun, but fun in a different way with a little cheat code, why not? I mean, why not do a mode where gravity is really low, or everyone has a really big head, or everything is unlocked? Why not do that? It's like, we're not here to punish the players by limiting the things that they can do. We want to give them everything. We want to give them a game that has all these different things and more.
I think that's what catches me with it is the idea that they would pay people, because a developer is being paid when they're writing that code to put the big head mode in, or the low gravity and stuff like that. And that's, I guess, what got me, because I don't know, maybe it's the military in me, but it seems like something that people wouldn't pay people. Yeah, frivolous. It seems frivolous. Like, I feel like a boss would come by and be like, "Hey, what are you doing? Get back to work." Is it not that way?
I was the boss though, so,
fair enough.
And I wanted cheat codes in the game, so that's what happened. And yeah, I enjoyed the process of putting in cheat codes. I used to try to encrypt them in ways that would be very difficult for people to figure out by using hashing algorithms, essentially. But because they were so short, it didn't actually work. It was actually quite easy for someone to reverse engineer the code and figure out what the codes actually were.
Is that typically how they
cheat codes to be? People would often look into the code and find cheat codes.
I used to wonder where they came from. Like a friend of a friend of a friend would know. And
later you would also, like, you would leak them to magazines, and magazines would use them as an exclusive thing, like, revealing the cheat code. But of course, you get to the internet and things just like spread like wildfire. Right. But yeah, I remember actually when I was younger, actually hacking games to, there's two things you can do. You could actually do a hack to get infinite lives or something. On the Spectrum, it's called a poke. because of the basic command to poke a value into a certain memory address. Or you could actually figure out what the cheat codes were, because often you would have one cheat code, and you can like search through for where that is in the actual code, and then you'll see there's a little table. Either sometimes they just have them as plain text or some kind of joystick orientation type thing, and then figure out what they were. So I try to do these really difficult to find cheat codes, and there's one in one of my games that no one ever found, and I've nearly forgotten it, but it was in Parasol Stars, which is a sequel to Rainbow Islands. It's Taito console game. It used to be, that was never arcade, but the cheat was, I think, like on the first screen, you have to turn all the maracas green and then throw them all to the left of the screen by jumping up from the bottom of the screen. And then you have to, on the next screen, you have to turn the piano green, carry the piano to the top of the screen, jump up as high as you can and throw it to the left. And then that gave you the super unlock everything cheat code.
Oh, wow.
But that was something no one could ever find, that, because that was so deeply hidden in the code, and no one ever did. And like I say, I'm sure it still works, but I'm not sure I could even do it now.
Has that been leaked before, or is this the first time it's coming out?
Yeah, I don't think I might have discussed it before, but yeah, go and try it, kids. It's yeah, everything green, throw it off to the side, jump piano off the top. It was a difficult one to find by accident there, so I'm not sure if people could.
I have seen some insane hidden areas or cheat codes and things like that before, and it really does make me wonder how the developer ever expected anybody to find that by accident. Just like a window in a building somewhere you're supposed to jump through.
A lot of the time they want it to remain secret so that they can reveal it later.
I see.
So that's the challenge as a developer, is hiding things so well that they can't be found by accident.
I gotta imagine a lot of game players, just given the breadth of the number of people who end up playing the game, there has to be just, 50 or 100 that spend all day just like running along walls. And have you ever met or spoken to anybody like that? Anybody ever approach you or email you like, hey, what's the cheat code?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, people used to talk to me about the glitches in the game. So there's a guy called Andy THPS, who was a famous Tony Hawk player. He was always like discussing it with us, and people started contacting us online after a while, because the internet was starting to get into being something back then, and so we got a lot of feedback like that. But yeah, people are often asking me, like, was this intentional? And a lot of the time it wasn't, because they're talking about some kind of glitch where you go through a wall and you start skating upside down.
Gotcha.
And if it was intentional, you can usually tell that it was.
Yeah, usually not glitched through a wall and like hovering over nothing. Because I do remember one glitch in one of the Tony Hawk games like that, where you could break through the ceiling and be above the map. And yeah. So after Tony Hawk 5, what took you away from doing development, or did you switch to another company, or what took you away from that train as a career?
Well, I kind of grew a bit tired of doing the same thing over and over again. And I thought that I would kind of set up on my own and just do my own thing. So I decided to leave Neversoft when the contract was up, because we'd sold the company to Activision 4 years before that, like a year after the first game. And we had a 4-year contract. And after that was up, I thought, I'm just going to go and do something else. Move on, do something new. They've already given me loads of money, so I'm good for now. I'll start my own company or whatever. So I left, and for a while I did some freelance work for various companies. I worked on, what was that game? There's another Spider-Man game for one of the Activision companies. Not Age of Reality, it was another one. Treyarch. And I worked on a poker game, World Series of Poker on the Nintendo Wii. A bit obscure. That's a friend's company.
Doesn't seem like a Wii game.
The AI for it. I did it because it was fun. It was AI, and I'd been reading articles on doing poker AI, and I wrote an article. And that was the other thing I did, was I got into writing. And this is kind of like how we transitioned to where I am now, is I became a columnist for Game Developer, a magazine, and wrote the monthly column. What was it called now? Inner Product. It's called Inner Product, which is a mathematical term to do with video games, vectors and stuff. And I wrote an article every month for them, and that was kind of fun, and I got used to doing that. And kind of at the same time I was doing that, I started getting into the online, like, blogging and whatnot, and that kind of led through a series of events to where we are now.
What year was that you stepped away from working with Neversoft?
That was 2003.
2003? Okay.
Yeah, a long time ago, like nearly 20 years ago now.
So that led you to doing blogging, writing. Where did YouTube come in for you?
Quite a lot later. I didn't really do much on YouTube until, I don't know, you have to look at my channel and look what the earliest things were. But I guess it was 9/11 debunks and stuff like that. I didn't really do any chemtrail debunking I did do some chemtrail debunking back then. But yeah, I guess that would have been in the early 2010s or something around there. I started doing a few YouTube videos to explain things. Yeah, especially the chemtrail stuff. Yeah, there was one where I did this. I have a collection of books on clouds, like all these old textbooks like this one, like, there's this Cloud Studies in Color from 1967, and it describes contrails, exactly the same as they are now. So I can show this to people and say, look, the clouds are actually the same. They've not changed at all, despite what this guy with a PhD is telling you.
Is that
and so I did a little video.
Is? Because I'm not familiar with the contrail conspiracy at all. I didn't even realize it was really a thing.
They think that the sky is mostly different to what it was. They think that all clouds should be these little puffy clouds, little tiny little cumulus clouds, little puffy clouds in the blue sky. And if you see anything else, like a gray haze or something like that, that's chemicals being sprayed by the government. Yeah.
I didn't know.
They don't realize that different clouds are. Yeah, some people do, but there's all kinds of different people and different beliefs in these theories. But yeah, so I did one of my first YouTube videos of any note was me going through my collection of books on clouds and showing that they were actually just regular clouds, regular contrails that have existed for 70 plus years.
So that first video, the day you decided I am going to make a video about this, what led you to that? Like, were you upset about misinformation? Like, what?
Well, I'd been doing it as a blog for a while before I did videos. So I started one blog on this thing called Morgellons disease, which was this kind of imagined condition that people have where they think there are little fibers emerging from their skin, and it's some kind of nanotechnology. And some people thought that they were being sprayed in the chemtrails, and that kind of led me to chemtrails. But I just kind of enjoy figuring things out and then explaining them to people, just like what we talked about earlier. That's the type of thing that I enjoy doing, is solving little puzzles. Like, what is the truth behind this particular claim? And then once you figure that out, how do you explain it to someone? And explaining things to people is also something you do in video games. If you work on a team with people and you have multiple programmers doing things, you need to explain how your code works. And if you're debugging something like an interaction between two systems, like they wrote some code, but sometimes it sends a number over that's outside a certain range, you need to be able to understand why they did what they did, and you need to be able to explain to them why it went wrong and what you did to fix it. So explaining things to people is something that also you develop a skill for. If you're going to be any kind of successful programmer working as part of a team, communication is essential. And so I enjoyed doing that but with these conspiracy theories. And so people will say things like normal contrails can't persist, like when a plane comes out of the back of a cloud comes out of the back of a plane. The chemtrail people think that it should instantly disappear within a few seconds. But sometimes they don't disappear and they spread out and cover the sky with a layer of haze, and they say that's a chemtrail. And so then how do I explain to people that that is wrong? And one of the ways was to use these books. Another way is to use algebra and the equations of condensation and things like that, which get a little bit more complicated. But some people respond to them, some people don't. So I just got into actually doing these kind of explaining things, and then it developed into all kinds of different topics like 9/11, and then UFOs and other things like flat Earth and election fraud and all kinds of different things.
What does it mean to be a skeptic to you?
Well, skeptic basically is about verifying the assumptions and the evidence behind arguments and claims. So if someone says something, you don't just accept it as true without question. You ask, what is the evidence for that? Especially if it's something that sounds a little dubious. Like if somebody says, I can read minds. Someone claims they can read minds, then you would say, show me, which is a fairly natural reaction. Some people are less skeptical to a variety of degrees. And if someone says, I can read your mind, they'll say, oh, really? That's interesting. Because some people believe things and they like to believe things. But skeptics, I think, are just basically people who demand evidence. You could also argue there are also people who use critical thinking more, but I try to stay away from describing it in terms of critical thinking, because I think people don't respond well to being told that they're not using critical thinking. Because if you say to someone that you're not thinking right, it's essentially like calling them stupid, and it often doesn't help the argument. But if you're asking them, what's the evidence, then that's something that they can show you. So a skeptic is someone who demands evidence for unusual claims.
Do you think that most of the population is skeptical?
Well, I think everybody is skeptical to a degree, and they're skeptical about different things. A lot of people are very skeptical of what politicians say, which is probably good that they are, because politicians often act in their own self-interest, and they're often are dishonest. Yes, and often they're not too. But that it's good not to assume that everything a politician says is true, because that wouldn't end very well. But I think it's kind of hard to say, because like when you talk about skeptics, there's the community of skeptics, like people who go to these skeptical conferences, which I've been to, and that group of people are generally a bit more scientific than the average person. Like they often will understand the algebra and things like that behind things. So I'd say the general public is probably a bit less skeptical than the average skeptic, as you kind of would expect. But everyone has a bit of skepticism.
As far as contrails go, this is something I did want to talk about a little bit today, because I think it's a well-documented fact that the government, well, I don't think it is a well-documented fact that the government used weather control during Vietnam to extend the monsoon season by several months. And I don't think there's any question left, as far as I know, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any question left that there is technology out there that does exist to control weather. Is that correct?
Well,
in a minor scale, point. Not mass scale, but in small localized cases.
In a minor scale. So what we're talking about here is what's called cloud seeding, and cloud seeding is something that has never been a secret. It's something that has been openly discussed since it was discovered, I believe, in the late 40s, and it's been openly used since the 50s to augment precipitation is the technical term, which basically means make it rain more. It augments the rain, the precipitation, or the snow. So we use it here. I'm in Sacramento near the Sierra Mountains, and just up the hill, they use cloud seeding sometimes to increase the snowpack. The way cloud seeding works is you spray condensation nuclei, just very, very small particles, onto clouds, and this makes the clouds condense into raindrops and then rain or fall down as snow. It's relatively straightforward science, and they use this stuff called silver iodide, and they usually make it by burning flares. They have a small plane and they have a number of flares, just like these roadside flares that you see. When there's an accident, the police will put down these flares on the road, look exactly like that, almost like a firework. It shoots out this kind of this mist out the back of the plane. It only works on existing clouds. So if you cloud seed on an empty sky, nothing will happen. You're just wasted. You might, you wouldn't get anything. They usually do it using small planes because you don't really need a huge plane, and it's usually done at a fairly low altitude, and it's done over. It's done over an existing cloud, and it doesn't leave a trail. So there's a vast difference in what it looks like versus what people say chemtrails are, which are these large planes high in the sky, often in clear blue sky, leaving these giant clouds of condensation behind them. So weather control is something that's been openly done, no secret whatsoever, perfectly, essentially innocuous. The stuff that they use isn't toxic, silver iodide, especially in the quantities that they use. It's just like perhaps a minor little blip in terms of atmospheric pollution, nothing at all compared to like what factories are spewing out. And it doesn't leave trails. So it's very easy for people to come across something like weather modification. You can go to the website weathermodificationinc.com, and you'll find a weather modification company that's been in operation, I believe, since the 50s or 60s. You can look in old newspapers. You can find in the classified sections of old newspapers, they had announcements as to when they were going to do weather modification. So they'll say weather modification will be performed between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Friday the 17th of July, 1956. Because they wanted people to know what these little planes were doing up in the sky, and they still do it now.
You're making it very hard to have a conspiracy here. Okay,
there's no conspiracy about weather modification because it's just this little thing that.
I thought it was internationally outlawed after Vietnam.
No, it's outlawed as a weapon of war.
Okay.
You're not allowed to do weather modification as warfare. There's a treaty.
So it is still going on domestically then?
Yeah, no, it's been going on since the 50s. It's going on all the time, and every year it's happening somewhere. They do it in Texas. They don't do it in the UK, I don't think, because it rains all the time in the UK. Why would they bother? So areas where the precipitation is a bit unstable, they use weather modification. They use cloud seeding, and that's pretty much all there is. Other countries do it, and sometimes in different ways. What we do in this country is called cold cloud seeding, and it's done to cold clouds, and it uses these condensation nuclei that are actually, I think, they're ice condensation nuclei. And you have to do it into a cold cloud, and it actually makes the drops freeze. Is that true? I'm not entirely sure if that's true or not. But it's a cold version. Then there's a warm one where they spray salt solution into the clouds, which does similar things because you get these little particles of salt, which is a natural cloud condensation nuclei, and it's actually one of the ones that you get in nature from the ocean. When the ocean surface of the ocean like froths and stuff, bits evaporate, and you actually get salt coming off the surface of the ocean, which sounds a bit strange, but it's what's actually happened. It's actually little particles of salt, because you think of a minute drop of water, really, really tiny drop, evaporates, it will leave a little bit of salt, and that's in the air, and it gets swept up. So there's actually a lot of sea salt in the air, and a lot of that is what clouds actually form around. especially over the ocean, obviously. So some countries will spray salt into the air as a way of doing that. And then there's a bunch of other supposed techniques like static electricity, which are highly speculative and often essentially scams. You see companies saying like, we will do this, we'll steer atmospheric rivers with our antenna, but it's just a big scam. And then there's some others that might work, but they haven't really been proven to work. But the basics of it are just the same as they were in the 1950s. There's an episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show. Have you seen the Dick Van Dyke Show? Old black and white show.
Long time ago.
Yeah. With Mary Tyler Moore. And there's an episode of that where they discuss cloud seeding. And the kid needs to dress up as a cloud. So a plane will come over and seed him, and they discuss like why would he seed you, and to make me rain, so it waters the crops. Because if you're in an agricultural area, like a lot of America, more of America was back then in the 50s, you'd be more familiar with this type of thing, because cloud seeding and crop dusting were things you would actually see relatively frequently.
So why would they outlaw
weather
in
modification?
war?
It's real. I think because of the potential for collateral damage. You create flooding and stuff. It's not good for small villages and whatnot.
That's true.
And also the escalation potential. If you start doing very large weather modification projects, like trying to steer a hurricane, for example, you could create this ridiculous disaster. People have tried to steer hurricanes. There was one experiment done to try to steer a hurricane, and that's actually done in a similar way. They use cloud seeding, and what they do is they try to cloud seed one side of the hurricane, like the eye wall. You got this eye in the middle of the hurricane, and so they spray or drop silver iodide particles on one side, and they think that it will collapse that side, and that will make it veer that way or the other way. So they tried it once, and it went in completely the random direction from what they were thinking, and ended up in some city. And they thought, oh well, bugger this, because
probably not a good idea.
Sue us because we did this, and so we've got no idea how to actually steer it. So we'll just give up, because it wasn't really a good idea anyway. So
yeah,
we don't
unlike nuclear testing, you can't just put a hurricane in an island somewhere out in the Pacific and test it. It is going to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So I could totally see that.
And hit it, and it did end up like causing some floods in a city. I can't remember if they did actually sue anybody, but yeah, it's that's why they don't do it, just for the liability reasons, and that's why it's outlawed. Because if you mess with a large enough weather system, they could create all kinds of problems for people downstream. Literally downstream with the floods.
So with all of there have been a lot of instances throughout history in which the U.S. government has either lied to the people or intentionally misled them about the implications of actions they're taking. And one that comes to mind specifically is the incident, I believe it was in San Francisco in the 60s, when they dumped some sort of chemical over the city. Are you familiar with this incident?
Yeah. Zinc cadmium sulfate was what they did. There's a few different ones for this type of thing that you're referring to. And what they were biological and chemical weapon disbursement tests. We wanted to see if there was a chemical attack or a biological weapon attack in the city, how far would it spread? So they used for the chemical weapons, they used a substance called zinc cadmium sulfate, which is slightly phosphorescent, and they used fairly small amounts of it, but it's something that's kind of easy to detect in fairly small amounts. So they would spray it from a plane in some instances off the coast of San Francisco or various places. There's a few different versions of this, and then they would see where the wind took it and where it ended up. And so from that, they could actually model what would happen if there was a chemical attack. Now, zinc cadmium sulfate was at least thought at the time to essentially be an inert substance in terms of its bio effects. So they thought it would be pretty harmless. It's since been found to be, one of these things that's, I can't remember, it's very slightly carcinogenic or something like that, which sounds terrible, but,
Sour potato
pretty
chips.
much everything is slightly carcinogenic. Everything is to some degree. But they probably wouldn't use that now because of it, because of the very slight things. But it was essentially an inert substance that they sprayed and then detected where it went. And they also did something similar with bacteria, which is a bit more worrisome. They used a type of bacteria, I can't remember what it was exactly, but it's something that's found in the environment. But they used a particular version of it so that they could detect where it ended up. And they sprayed it, and I think they let some of it go in a subway station somewhere. I'm not sure where that was.
I think it was Chicago or New York. I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a fairly big city, but yes. Yeah. So again, it's the same idea. They took what they thought was a harmless substance, a harmless bacteria, and they just wanted to see how far it spread, because the idea was they wanted to figure out the civil defenses that would be needed if Russia attacked us with biological or chemical weapons. Possibly also they were thinking we might use these ourselves in the future, and we could attack Moscow with chemical weapons. So I don't know exactly what's going on there. And they didn't tell people what they were doing because it was highly classified, and they didn't want the Russians to know that they were investigating these things, so the Russians would try something different. So that's basically what happened. And people don't like it, of course, because no one wants to be sprayed by fake chemical weapons or fake biological weapons, or even real bacteria or a chemical. It sounds scary, zinc cadmium sulfate.
If I remember right,
there's some conspiracy theories. And some people think that it's was radioactive, but that was a very dubious association. I think just this one woman, I can't remember her name, made, but there wasn't really any real evidence for it. And I think it was essentially just essentially an inert substance that got sprayed, and it's just something that the actual health effects of it were, I think, calculated to be the same as like 5 seconds of secondhand smoke or something like that.
And this is from the San Francisco incident?
Increasing things. Yeah, the zinc cadmium sulfate trials.
I thought there was a lot of deaths connected to that one.
No, I think you're thinking of the biological weapon one. There weren't actually any deaths associated with anything that you could actually say it came from this thing.
The government wouldn't tie it together.
Yeah. So people have looked into this, and they've tried to make connections. There was an interesting thing, like the Scientologists actually tried to create this weird conspiracy theory. There was an operation that they did back then. It's got a name, but there was some weird thing that the Scientologists did back then, where they broke into the offices of somewhere, and then they stole the documents, and then they framed it in a certain way. But anyway, that's just like another sidebar. But yeah, I think you're thinking of like a bunch of people died of the flu or something like that year, like more than normal, and people thought that it might have been connected to this bacteria
could be
release, but they never actually tied it directly.
I see.
Or there might have been one person who died of this bacteria, but some people die of this bacteria every year anyway. But because it was at the same time, they thought it was the same thing. But statistically speaking, there's not very good evidence that it was actually connected.
Okay.
But it's definitely something that people like to wrap up in the whole chemtrails conspiracy theory. And they say, well, the government did this. They sprayed us with chemical weapons back then. Why aren't they spraying us with chemical weapons back now? I mean, for a start, it was completely different to the whole chemtrail thing. It was not visible trails. It was, a very limited amount of trials of stuff. And it was stuff that was inert. The only purpose of spraying this stuff was to trace how far it went through the city and, through, the community. So I can certainly understand why people don't like it and are suspicious of it. But there isn't really strong evidence that there was any nefarious intent or that anything like that has been done since.
Yeah, I think there's, again, I'd have to look into this further because I haven't done really any research on it. But it changes the story a lot when it goes from 400,000 people killed by the government due to chemical weapons released over San Francisco to, well, nobody really died from it, and maybe a few people died from the flu. Like that totally changes the picture of what's happening now, because if none of that happened in the past, then why would it be happening now?
No, well, certainly nothing of that scale. I mean, I think I'd only heard, realistically, like dozens of people at the most over years, and sometimes like many years later. I think, some people might have taken the zinc cadmium sulfate thing and said like it's radioactive, and then tried to like map to 30 years later there was an uptick in cancer or something. But there's no way of tying the two things together.
Yeah,
and it could be from any one of a number of things, and I don't think the number's even valid because a lot has changed in the world over 30 years, and a lot has been going on. So it's extraordinarily difficult to take this tiny little thing that happened somewhere and try to figure out the actual correlation with something now. And I don't think you'd have to do it based on the location as well. I don't believe that was really ever done. And if it was, like, I haven't seen it.
Fair. Yeah, you're right. A lot of things have changed. The nuclear tests, throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, even. I think we did nuclear tests as late as the 60s, maybe. I wasn't alive then, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that radiation levels have increased, and radiation from things like Hiroshima have been found worldwide. PFAS has been found in 98 or 99.8% of Americans' blood or something like that. There are a lot of chemicals and stuff that are impacting us nowadays, and I know a lot of people who are concerned about our food.
Like, things have happened to people. Sperm count and testosterone levels have decreased measurably. These things have actually changed. And various conditions, it's hard to say sometimes, but have increased. Possibly there's more autism now. It's possible. It could be just a statistical thing because they're measuring it more and things like that. But it could also be that there's more of it. And things actually have changed in terms of the chemical makeup of people. We took lead out of gasoline because it was having health effects on people. It was decreasing IQ in children. So there are things that happen to the environment that have actually had measurable effects. So again, I can understand why people would be suspicious of something like these chemical trials, especially the connotations that they have, like the testing a chemical weapon or the testing a biological weapon, and then people who are of a suspicious mind would leap at that association later and say, if they say, oh, they look at this little uptick in the graph like 30 years later. And then there was this thing here that happened there, then let's link them together. But I really don't think the statistics is actually there.
So getting more onto the alien topics, I know we're running short on time now. What are your opinions on Bob Lazar's story?
I think it's a load of crap.
Yeah?
I think he made it all up.
Why?
Why did he make it up? For fun. I think he's an intelligent guy, and he likes attention. He made like a rocket motor for his motorbike and a rocket car and things like that. He likes being interviewed by the newspapers, and he likes to have all kinds of fun adventures. He worked for a brothel for a while, like installing video cameras, and he's got like a successful chemical supply company, and he had a job working for a contractor who worked at Area 51, so he had like this connection to it there. But what he's suggesting is entirely without evidence. What he's claiming doesn't stand up to scrutiny. He's saying that the government had a whole bunch of flying saucers that they discovered from an archaeological dig, and they have in hangars somewhere in Area 51, and yet he and he had access to it, and yet he is mysteriously allowed to talk about it. And he also claims he has a degree from Stanford, but Stanford has no record of him ever being there. So now he claims that he went to Stanford, but it's all being covered up by the government. So, but there's no actual supporting evidence for his claims. So it's kind of like people who trust the Bible based on what the Bible says, just because the Bible is internally self-consistent. It sounds great. And they like that, so they're going to say that the Bible is correct. Now, Bob Lazar, the stuff he says, like tallies very well with their personal beliefs and their personal life experiences, and so they tend to believe him. But what evidence does he have to support his claims? He doesn't. He just has a cool story, and the story sounds so outlandish, and he has all these problems with it that don't actually line up with reality, like being able to carry around element 115 in stable form and things like that. And his education credentials not checking out. There's so many problems with it. And there's a whole bunch more. Other people have looked into it a lot more than I have. The simplest explanation is just that he made up this story for fun.
Now, given the government's history of cover-ups, though, including Project Blue Book, in which they attempted to discredit and undermine anybody's story who came out about UFOs, that's a released, unclassified thing now and is a fact. Why do you think they would do that if what he was saying isn't true? I guess what I'm saying is these are supporting pieces of evidence to what he's claiming.
No, not really. I mean, that's kind of like saying like the zinc cadmium sulfate trials are supporting evidence for chemtrails. They're different things. Project Blue Book was about reports of people seeing UFOs, like things flying in the sky. It wasn't about recovered craft, recovered like actual flying saucers, sports model flying saucers that were recovered from an archaeological dig and flown around in, and Bob Lazar goes in it and he throws ping pong balls at the gravity field. It's a completely different kettle of fish from the public is reporting flying saucers and pilots are reporting things flying around their planes, to Bob Lazar has actually had hands-on experience with things that we've recovered. The government wanted to suppress the reports of flying saucers because they were taking up so much of the Air Force's time. And that was the rationale that they gave for covering it up. And that's why, Hynek was kind of tasked with doing that type of thing back then. But yeah, that was essentially just about, glowing lights in the sky and strange looking like cigar-shaped things off in the distance and things like that. It's not really the same as what Lazar was saying. So I don't really think that they're covering up something specific in Project Blue Book. They were just trying to suppress all these reports, because they didn't want to have to deal with them, because invariably when they've looked into these things, they've turned out to be nothing. And that's
so you think it was just a time saver? They did all this, spent the money just to save time on reports?
No, well, they didn't. They stopped doing it. And the purpose of Blue Book wasn't just to clamp things down.
Right. Yeah, it had a lot of other purposes.
Kind of ended up. The process of it. I mean, Blue Book itself wasn't really just a single project. It was a whole bunch of different things that were going on, and it got this moniker of Blue Book. But it was a bunch of investigations, and they originally wanted to figure out what people were seeing, and there was the specter of the Cold War going on at the time. It might have been some kind of Russian thing. Were people seeing Russian things? But no, what happened was more and more people started reporting random lights that they see in the sky. You go onto like MUFON now, like the MUFON database, read through the 130,000 reports that they have there. They're all crap. Yeah, and the ones that aren't crap
are crap. 130,000. You've read them all.
I've sampled a statistically relevant portion of them, and they're like you can start to recognize them after a while. The guys will say something like, "I saw a triangle of white lights in the sky." Birds.
Yeah.
And you look at the video, and it's like a bunch of birds flying over. And I saw a cigar-shaped UFO. It's a plane. Yes, video cigar-shaped UFO. It's a plane. The people just start reporting the same things over and over again, and it was difficult. Back then it was much more manual. You had to file paper reports back then, and someone had to read them and like sign them, and there was all this bureaucracy that you had to go through. Now it's a bit easier that we can do it online, so perhaps a bit more open to the idea of going through all these things. But back then, there was just people calling up the Air Force all the time, calling up air traffic control towers, and it was just not just a waste of time, but a distraction for the people who should have been doing other things. And you get this deluge of crap reports. You're going to want to try to shut it down. I can understand it. I mean, I personally would. It'd be great if we had lots of highly detailed reports from back then that we could actually get our teeth into. But I can certainly understand. Based on what I've seen from UFO reports, you go onto Twitter or the UFO groups on Facebook and look at the UFO thing. This is the best UFO thing I've ever seen, and it's either a fake or it's just like a white light that does nothing. None of these UFO things really stand up to any kind of real scrutiny, and the ones that do only do it because they're so fuzzy or far away that you can't really tell what's going on.
That's a fair assessment, and that's really where I end up with it a lot of times too, because you are right that, like I said, I've watched a lot of your content, and there isn't definitive proof of any kind. Like, there just isn't. Everything can be contested. However, that is why I mentioned the Rogue Wave story at the beginning of this too. Just because
it only takes one though. It took that one Rogue Wave observation of that oil platform actually seeing it. And it took that one observation of the guy drinking the Heliobacter bacteria, and they took this, one person actually measuring the trajectory of a meteorite and then finding the actual meteorite like buried in the field to prove it. But we haven't had that one thing with UFOs, and maybe it will come. But each time we look into one of these things, it starts out promising, and then it just falls away into nothingness.
Now, I know people's personal testimony is about worth nothing. I know that. However, certain people with knowledge in a field, I feel, should be given a little bit more credibility. Do you feel that that's the case? If a physicist says, "Hey, I saw an alien," versus a guy who works at a convenience store, do you feel they hold different weight?
Well, I think it depends on the individual case. I think in general, yes, I think that is true. I think someone like a professional military pilot probably is a bit better at describing things than a supermarket security guard. But it depends. It doesn't mean that it is necessarily therefore true, just because you're giving it a bit more weight. Like you talk about like David Fravor, who saw this Tic Tac. Is it possible that he mistook what he was looking at? Our possibilities are kind of limited here as to what might have happened. Like, he made it up. I don't think he made it up. So we'll toss that one out. He had some kind of hallucination. Well, multiple people saw the same thing, or at least similar things. So we can't really rule that out. We can rule that out, I think. And it could be some kind of weird anti-gravity machine that either we've developed ourselves or is from an alien planet, or some kind of aliens or extra-dimensional beings or something like that have developed some kind of craft and they're flying it around in the atmosphere, or people are flying around this warp drive machine in the atmosphere. Or he misperceived what he was looking at and perhaps later misremembered it to a certain degree. And Alex Dietrich had a similar experience, but not the same, and also misperceived it. So you've got two things that both of which sound very unlikely. You've got on the one hand secret anti-gravity craft, on the other side trained pilot makes mistake or makes several mistakes. and coincidentally, the radar shows something at the same time. So you got to kind of then look into that. If you don't have any more information than what we have now, you got to think like, is this thing actually the most likely thing that there's actually a secret craft that defies gravity and can accelerate at an insanely high rate of speed that defies all known physics, or that there were a series of coincidences and mistakes? And now, a lot of people are saying, oh, David Fravor is a trained observer, and also the radar shows this, and Alex Dietrich was there, and there was 2 other pilots. So it's impossible. Therefore, it must be a anti-gravity craft that can defy all known physics. Now, to me, that doesn't seem like a fair balance. That doesn't seem like it's just one or the other. I think it's far more likely that Fravor made a mistake, simply because the things like making mistakes and coincidences happening, they happen all the time. People make mistakes all the time. Coincidences happen all the time. Someone wins the lottery every few months. An entirely new form of propulsion that breaks all known physics doesn't happen very often. Now, it might, but it's not something that's particularly common, unlike people making mistakes and unlike coincidences happening.
Well, I want to be careful on that because I don't think it breaks known physics. I don't think an anti-gravity drive breaks known physics. It's well within Einstein's equations to exist.
Yeah, people say this. People say that, and then you can kind of like push the equations in every way. It's you don't know how to make an anti-gravity craft that does that. And you don't know how to fix the problems of, say, an Alcubierre drive operating in the atmosphere, where the atmosphere in front of the craft gets compressed at the speed of light, essentially, into nothingness, and then is released at the end as a massive wave of gamma radiation. And you don't know really how
element 115 would do that either.
But yeah. And you talk to Jack Sarfati, and he tells you that, we can do it with an AI controlled metamaterial that called me on the telephone from the future. These are very speculative and unusual ideas. And so saying that it doesn't break known physics because, well, is it though? Is it theoretically possible?
Given
How do you know
all
it's
time and
theoretically
space,
possible?
I mean, Einstein. I'm trusting Einstein on this, okay? Because I don't personally know, but I do trust Einstein a bit. He's been pretty right.
But did Einstein say that we could do this? Did Einstein say we could actually have a craft that could accelerate at 4,000 G without creating a sonic boom, and that could do the same thing through water and perhaps even through mountains? Einstein didn't say that. He was.
But there's what is it? The Einstein-Rosen bridge. The Einstein-Rosen bridge. It allows for a wormhole. Yes, it is a wormhole, but it allows for the tearing of space-time, or not the tearing, but the bending of space-time to the point where you could manipulate time. So mathematically, I think it is possible, but putting it in a vehicle or giving it enough energy. I mean, I do podcasting for a living, so I don't know. But
I think here, like you're kind of believing the physicists that you like here, like we were talking about earlier. Like I think there's lots of physicists who would say, yeah, it's not going to work. But there are some physicists that say, oh yeah, it's perfectly feasible. It's perfectly feasible that we can do this. It doesn't break any physics whatsoever.
So I look at it this way, and this is my argument for aliens as well, because I do believe that Einstein allowed for inverse time travel, I think is the best way of putting that. Is that how you understand it to be as well?
I'm not sure, actually. I think he... there's the idea of the arrow of time, and can the arrow of time go backwards? And that's kind of a different thing from actual time travel, which is you taking your forward-going self and then taking it back in time. There's tachyons, which are like particles that supposedly go back in time, but they're all these kind of theoretical constructs.
And I think tachyons were disproved a couple years ago too. I think.
Yeah, that's good. We stop worrying about that. But what we have is a mathematical model of the universe, and we don't know if our model is the right one. Mm-hmm. And there could be some law of physics that just basically fundamentally prevents time travel or fundamentally prevents faster than light travel. But even though it seems like it's mathematically possible, perhaps that is because our mathematical model isn't actually sophisticated enough to detect these limits. And we do have, most models do actually have these limits of can't go faster than light, and you can't have kind of like a massless propulsion system, things like that. So
I feel like that touches on sort of one of the issues here, because you're saying that the math may be inaccurate and therefore it may not be true. But that seems like a very conspiracy theorist argument, because you're...
I tend to go with a pragmatic approach to physics. What works. And if you see something working, it will work. Now, if you come up with a mathematical model that says that something should work, that's great. But until you've actually demonstrated it working in a practical way, how useful is this information? Because we don't actually know what all the implications are of building this warp drive, the possibility of building this warp drive. And there's a lot of weird science out there, and the people who are into this type of thing often exist on the fringes. The one scientist I mentioned earlier does actually talk about AIs calling in from the future on the telephone, and he's one of the most popular guys on UFO Twitter, and people are going, "Oh, look at these amazing equations that you've come up with that prove that we can do these things." And because no one understands these equations, and you've got a guy with a PhD in physics, saying these things, easy. Like people believe him. I mean, you don't. You're not really even into algebra that much. So you're probably not into theoretical physics that much either. I mean, I'm not really, but I'll believe it when I see it. And and if there's a model that predicts, faster than light travel being attainable in a certain way, then let's work towards it. But I don't really see much going on there.
Yeah, I just feel like that if that is a possibility, if faster than light travel is a possibility, it just breaks the whole game, because that would mean that if there ever is at any point in the trillion years of the future where matter still exists, that aliens could develop that technology, then they theoretically could travel back to this point or every point in space and time forever and be everywhere. So given... And
it's like, if there's time travel, where is everybody?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, they could be here. There's obviously the advanced technology. Would we even recognize them? I mean, I feel that a super advanced species would develop itself down to the nanoscale. Why even have these giant, inefficient
You think there'd
bodies?
Be a lot of tourists? Like, there's lots of entertaining bits of history in the world.
It could be trillions. If you're the size of an air molecule, I mean, if you're part of a hive mind of 100.
Yeah, but essentially now you're talking about magic, like something coming down to the size of an air molecule being a conduit for intelligence. It doesn't really make any sense, and you're essentially talking about magic, which you sure maybe, but
it gets totally away from anything that we know.
Show me. Right.
No, that's fair. And that's where I run into that issue too, because I'm a bit the same, because I would like to see proof, is it possible? But that's where it breaks down, is because if time travel is possible, then you have to figure anything that is theoretically possible to do with our understanding of science has to happen somewhere.
So what's with the Tic Tacs then?
I don't know.
If you got time travel is possible, you've got godlike beings from the future coming in. Why are they flying around in Tic Tac shape?
Maybe not everybody's as equally advanced, Maybe some are younger species.
That's what I'm saying.
But it's all speculation at that point.
You've got the entire future. You've got say a million years in the future, the Tic Tac people start sending back Tic Tacs in time, and then a billion years in the future, you've got the air molecule people sending air molecules back in time. Wouldn't they get kind of crowded with all these people coming back to to visit the Nimitz training exercise. Why are they coming back to visit the Nimitz?
Well, this is why I'm not tying it in.
What was so exciting
specifically
about that they're coming back from millions of years in the future to view this one little thing?
That's fair. And yeah, no, that's why I'm not tying it in with anything specific. You know, I can't say that the videos are real. You've done a fantastic job of debunking them and providing doubt. I am still curious how, if the derotation mechanism was just a glare, which you demonstrated very well. I had one question. Do you know if the systems actually work like a normal cell phone camera? Because you've always demonstrated that with a cell phone camera and a light. Do they actually function the same or no?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Nothing at all like it. There's a much more complicated.
So would it be an accurate
obviously.
Depiction still?
It's illustrating the principle that if the glare is relative to a camera, the shape of the glare is relative to camera. It's like you shine. I get my little flashlight out. If you shine a flashlight at something, it's actually relative to the shape of the camera. Like what you're seeing here. I'm not sure if it shows up. Like you can see like little spikes.
The 9 blades.
Like little spikes coming here. Now, if I was to rotate my camera, which I can't because it's fixed on a tripod, then you would see the spikes wouldn't actually move because the camera is going to give you the same picture as before. It's looking out and the bright lights are still in the same position relative to the camera. So the spikes wouldn't move, but I would move and the room would move. I'd rotate. Let me just do a little bit. Let's see, I can't really do it. But yeah, that would rotate. And then if I derotate the picture to make me upright again, then you would see these spikes move. And that's what the derotation mechanism is doing. And
for anybody watching this too, I do want to say, go check out Mick's video on this because he does a great explanation of what I'm describing here. I'm just asking for the quick rundown here.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing.
How would they target track onto a reflection? How would it lock on like
that? Can you see this?
Yes.
Yes. So you can track it. You know, there it is.
Fair, but
it's visual tracking. They use what's called a passive track. They're not using radar, and Fravor himself said this. He uses a passive track, which means essentially it's like in After Effects. It basically just tracks the object. Like my face is being tracked right now. I don't know if I can show you this, but if you look at, let's see, there's a little square around my face. You can just make it out, like right there. And if I move down, the square moves around. You can't really see it there, but there's a little square on my screen. It's tracking my face, and if it just was to track this instead, it would track this, and that's how the tracking works on the FLIR system. If they just use a passive track, they're just tracking visually. So if it looks like something, it's tracking it, and it's not like it's just a glare. Like this is a flashlight, is a physical object, but now you can't see it. All you can see is the glare. So when you're tracking the glare, you are actually tracking this physical object that is behind it. This is the equivalent of a jet plane. So it's just tracking what it sees. It's nothing particularly complicated.
That's fair. Yeah, I guess that was my only question as far as that was just how would it track the glare, because that didn't make a lot of sense, but that does make sense. You know, if it is a physical object on the screen being picked up, it felt weird to me that it would be moving across the screen before it locked onto it. If it was a glare, or I would think that it would be something that they would have noticed on the way out there and back. They would have seen the same reflection if it was just something off the housing. But yeah, you know, it almost feels like it had to have been an object of some kind.
Yeah, it is an object, though. It is an object. I mean, this is an object.
Well, right, but originally in one of your videos,
it's not a reflection or anything. It's just the bright light at the end of the object. It's attached to the object, so it moves around.
That's fair.
And that's all it is.
Have you heard of Haim Eshed?
I don't think so.
Okay, he was the Israeli space defense minister. Have you heard? Do you know where I'm going with this?
Is this the guy who says that there was some kind of contact with alien civilizations?
Yes. He's the one who said there's a galactic federation, and then the United States is in on it, and Israel, and they're on Mars with a base and all this other crazy stuff. I know that testimony, this is why I was asking you earlier about whether you trust the testimony of people, or at least put more weight on the testimony of people who are in a position of authority. Because to hear the Israeli space defense minister say that the U.S. is working with aliens, it's pretty out there, obviously.
It's totally out there. And again, that's for some evidence. And I would also point out that people in positions of power sometimes say crazy things. I mean, there was a FBI head office guy called Ted Gunderson, I think his name was, got totally into the whole chemtrail thing. He also got totally into the QAnon thing. He believed there was this secret network of tunnels under Washington where children were being smuggled, and he believed in chemtrails. And he was the FBI station chief in Los Angeles for a number of years, and very well regarded. But later in life, he turned into a crazy old man. And this happens. People have very highly respectable careers in various fields, even like generals in the military. You do their service, and then they come out and they start reading a whole bunch of conspiracy crap, and they start going a little bit crazy. Like General Flynn has kind of gone down the QAnon route. There's General McInerney, similarly. Just because someone was in a position of authority doesn't make them immune to falling for strange beliefs or conspiracy theories. And we know for a fact that this has happened in the past. So this guy from Israel spouting a bunch of nonsense about the Galactic Federation, unless he can come up with some actual evidence, is no better than that woman who thinks that she saw a bunch of aliens in a cave somewhere.
Do you think it's worth investigating at least? What do you personally believe? Do you want to believe in aliens, or do you want to not believe in aliens?
I don't want to. I don't have a desire for a belief. I have a desire for reality.
Okay.
I'm not trying to figure out I'm not trying to argue that it's one way because I prefer that way. I want to figure out what is real. So if aliens are real, I would love to figure it out. And I'd love to see the evidence for it. And I'd love to see the aliens, come and visit us and do whatever. It'd be very, very interesting. Probably kind of scary because, it would be like the Spaniards going to South America, which didn't really end very well for the South and Central Americans. An advanced civilization meeting a less advanced civilization is always a bit of a dodgy proposition, but, it'd be super interesting. Probably more likely is that we'll detect a far off presence of aliens somewhere. But yeah, I would love to figure out what's going on, regardless of what it actually is. So I don't prefer one belief over another.
It's good to hear you're open-minded about that. That was kind of the answer I was hoping for, honestly. I don't want to keep you all day. I think
everyone would say the same thing. I think most scientists, believe like there's life somewhere out there in the universe. A lot of them believe that it's possible that Earth has been visited sometime in the past by aliens. It's certainly possible. There's a very tiny possibility, I think, that aliens are visiting us right now and just hiding very carefully. But we all scientists go by the evidence. Some people have biases and they get influenced by those biases, but a true scientist will just look at the evidence and weigh that evidence and go with whatever the result is.
I don't want to keep you all day. I know we've hit our time here, but I just had like 2 more questions for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of which I did see you mention that you had held beliefs that you had psychic abilities as a kid or when you were younger. How, maybe you can explain a little bit more about that and how you came to be a little bit more skeptical.
Well, I was raised Catholic. And so I was taught as a child that if you pray for things, then you might get them. Obviously you're praying for something, and so you expect some kind of result. Someone is sick and you pray for them, and then you expect them to get better. So I was raised from an early age, essentially, with this belief in the power of prayer, which essentially is the power of, kind of like a psychic power, like you can wish something to happen. Then, what happened was there was a raffle at school, and I took some of the money my mother had given me for dinner. This was the change I should have brought home. And I bought 2 raffle tickets for, I think, 5p each. And the first one came up, and I won a packet of chocolate biscuits. And the second one came up, and I won like a packet of candy or something. And whilst they were drawing the numbers, I was saying, number 15, number 15, number 15. And it came up. And that kind of convinced me that I could actually do that for a while. Then I also I read a short story by Roald Dahl about a guy who trained himself to look through playing cards. Like he would look at the back of the card and you could see what was on the front of the card. And I thought that would be a great thing to do. And based on my experience winning the raffle at school, I thought I'd give it a go. And I think I would be about 7 at the time. And so I tried that for a few years, and I kind of people, I think pretty much everybody has tried to use the Force at some point in their life.
I think we have. Yeah, I can admit to it.
You've tried it yourself. Oh, everybody has tried to use the Force. You think, I'm going to make this thing move, and then you put it on you, and you rise. You try really hard. Everybody's really hard. And you can imagine if it did actually move by mistake, like you're brilliant or something, you might convince yourself that it has happened. So, when I was a little kid, I was convinced I had psychic powers, and then I couldn't actually really do anything. So it faded like a belief in Santa Claus did.
Well, I'm glad you were able to get away from that, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. I wanted to mention your book. It's Escaping the Rabbit Hole, correct? You're muted there, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no problem.
It told me I was muted. It knew I was muted and told me. It was it's a new thing. All right, so Escaping the Rabbit Hole: How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. It's a guide to helping friends, families, and loved ones. So it's just about how to talk to people who believe in conspiracy theories and why people get into them, and some of the details about some of the things like chemtrails and 9/11 conspiracy theories.
Do you have any more books coming out here soon?
You think I would, but I haven't managed to get one going just yet. But I'm going to do essentially a sequel to it, and perhaps do something with a bit more focus on UFOs and things like that.
Seems to be a popular topic nowadays, UFOs specifically. Well, there was a whole ton of questions I had here for you today, Mick. Maybe we can do this again sometime, but I want to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much, Dana. It's been a very interesting conversation, so thank you very much for that.
Oh, of course.